One thing we know how to do is to keep on going. Our motto is just do one thing. If it works, do another. If it doesn't work, do another anyway. Use your strength and your creative thinking to change people's minds. Don't give up. Thank you.
We're so glad that you've joined us for this evening's program, Revolutionary Art, Gender and Racial Inequality in the Art World. I'm Kristen Motti, a programs librarian at the Boston Public Library. On behalf of the BPL, we are thrilled to bring you tonight's program. Here's a little bit about tonight's speakers. Frida Kahlo is a member of the Guerrilla Girls. The Guerrilla Girls are anonymous artist activists who use disruptive headlines, outrageous visuals, and killer statistics to expose gender and ethnic bias and corruption in art, film, politics, and pop culture. They believe in an intersectional feminism that fights for human rights for all people. They undermined the idea of a mainstream narrative by revealing the understory, the subtext, the overlooked, and the downright unfair. Kate Dellis, who will interview Frida later in the program, is an audio journalist, writer, artist, and radio producer on GBH's The Culture Show. Thank you for being here, and please join me in welcoming Frida Kahlo from the Guerrilla Girls. Thank you.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here in a place that's dedicated to preserving knowledge and making it accessible to everyone. Let's all try to fight to keep it that way. Can we all give it up for a moment for the fearless librarians and archivists all over the country who have been working day and night to preserve all the data that's being wiped off government websites as we speak? Thank you. You know, we're facing such an uncertain time right now. You know, our government is being dismantled so quickly, and who knows what the outcome will be tomorrow. The Secretary of Education has moved to dissolve the very department she's been charged to head. Hardworking government employees are being fired without reason. Women's rights, civil rights, trans rights are under attack. The government is scrubbing out the contributions of women and persons of color from our nation's history, and teachers are being told what they can and cannot teach. The list goes on and on. I know that libraries are quiet places, but I thought it might be a good idea to start out tonight with one huge collective scream. Are you up for it? Okay, one. Let's make sure they can hear us up in Copley Square. 1, 2, 3. Ah! Whew. That makes me feel a little bit better. You know, we don't have a magic wand, but one thing we know how to do is to keep on going. Our motto is just do one thing. If it works, do another. If it doesn't work, do another anyway. Use your strength and your creative thinking to change people's minds. Don't give up. I'm Frida Kahlo, and I'm a founding member of the Guerrilla Girls, and I've been involved in just about everything the Guerrilla Girls have done from 1985 to today. We have created political art that uses the persuasive strategies of advertising to show people something they don't know. We figured out an in-your-face way, an unforgettable way, to break through people's preconceptions and prove to them that the art system isn't always a meritocracy where museums, galleries, critics, and collectors always know best. From the very beginning, we've been diverse in age, economic class, sexual identities, and we've been from many ethnic backgrounds: Asian, South Asian, African American, Latinx, European, and so on. And each one of us has taken the name of a dead woman artist as a pseudonym. Now, we love art and artists, but discrimination and bias have always been on our mind. Now, while we were working years ago on a project about all those commemorative months that we celebrate in the United States, snap, an idea came to mind. We realized that the word discrimination contains the word nation. So that helped us do this video that was on a billboard for months last year on the Sunset Strip in Hollywood. Now, gender bias, let's talk about that. The Guerrilla Girls first formed in 1985 to do street posters about the dire situation of women in the New York art world and beyond. We went after artists, museums, curators, and the galleries that participated in a rigged system. Then, one Sunday morning in 1989, we went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art to count the naked bodies in the artworks. What we discovered and the poster that we created from it became a game changer. Do women have to be naked to get into the Metropolitan Museum? Less than 5% of the artists in the modern art section are women, but 85% of the nudes are female. Now, this poster is a perfect example of how we craft our work. We use disruptive headlines, outrageous designs, and killer statistics. We try to twist an issue around and present it in a way that hasn't been seen before. After seeing this poster, we dare anyone to go into a museum without thinking about sexism and art history. You know, some people loved our work, others thought it was too negative, but from the beginning, people couldn't stop talking about it. For the haters, we tried to do a positive poster, but of course, it didn't really come out that way. The advantages of being a woman artist. Working without the pressures of success. Knowing whatever kind of work you do, it'll be labeled feminine. Having a break from the art world in your 4 freelance jobs. Being included in revised versions of art history. And finally, getting your picture in an art magazine wearing a gorilla mask. Now, this poster spoke to women all over the world, and it's been translated into Korean, French, Spanish, Turkish, Cantonese, and even South India's Malayalam. We get letters from women all over the world who are working in other fields. We got letters from women in cartooning, in music, veterinary science. We even got a letter once from someone who was studying to be a mortician, telling us that this poster is not just about art, it's about their lives too. We're all developing new words to describe all those old prejudices so we can fly under the radar of government censors in the future. So this is ethnic bias, i.e. racism. Looking in 1986 deeper into the intersection of ethnic and gender bias, it was obvious that there was even more prejudice against Black artists. So we did this poster. And when we looked at the art world, or the art market in 1989, which had sort of become a poker game, we decided to give wealthy art collectors some advice about investing in undervalued commodities. Not that we think of art as a commodity, but anyway, here it is. When racism and sexism are no longer fashionable, what will your art collection be worth? The art market doesn't bestow megabuck prices on the work of a few white males forever. For the $17.7 million you just spent on a single Jasper Johns painting, you could have bought at least one work by all of these women and artists of color. That was the economic situation of the art market in 1989. In 2002, a bunch of women film directors asked us to do a billboard a few blocks from where the Oscars were being held. And this is what we came up with: the anatomically correct Oscar. He's a white dude, like almost everyone who won. As usual, we had to back up our disruptive headlines with the statistics. These were the statistics in 2002. Then, 14 years later, in 2016, we updated our Oscar billboard in Minneapolis during the Oscars So White campaign. And as you can see from the statistics, not enough had changed. And venturing outside the art world during the pandemic, we designed a billboard about prison injustice that was seen all over Miami. And here it is in Spanish, and here it is in English. Why does the US have 5% of the world's population, but 20% of the world's prisoners? Well, one reason, Black Americans get more prison time than white Americans for the same crimes. But heading back to the art world, here's a 2022 project that does a deep dive into a much beloved bunch of American landscape paintings. It's Reality Check, the Hudson River School paintings. That year, in 2022, the Thomas Cole Foundation in Hudson, New York, asked us to do a poster about 19th century women landscape painters who were overlooked by art historians in their lifetimes. When we looked into the Hudson River School paintings and the time they were done, we decided to tell a much more complicated story. And here's the project installed in the hallway of Thomas Cole's historic home in Catskill, New York. First, we compared an idyllic Hudson River School painting by Asher Durand to a gritty photograph by Seneca Ray Stoddard taken in a similar landscape at about the same time. Here's the images. We allowed the paintings to talk. Reality check on the Hudson River School paintings. The Hudson River School wasn't a school, it was a club of white guys who painted the American landscape, hung out together, and sold their work to many of the same rich collectors. Female painters like Sarah Cole and Susie Barstow were welcome to tag along with the guys, but couldn't expect the same recognition. Successful Black landscape painters like Edward Mitchell Bannister and Robert Duncanson could admire the Hudson River School painters from afar, but could never dare join their club. Hudson River School paintings depicted a wilderness first tamed by white settlers when in fact the land had been inhabited, cultivated, and protected for millennia by indigenous nations. This is the lower photograph. And this is what the photograph says. These indigenous nations endured genocide, disease, and war, only to be relocated elsewhere by broken treaties, unscrupulous land speculators, and acts of the US Congress. While Hudson River School painters romanticized and idealized the seized land, robber barons extracted whatever they could and left a mess for future generations. This photograph is taken in the Adirondacks. These same tycoons bought the idyllic Hudson River School paintings, donated them to museums, and helped promote an Eden that never really was. Now, we're not in any way criticizing the beauty of the Hudson River School paintings or their importance in American history. We just want to remind everyone that they are a fantasy. Reproductive and abortion rights. Reproductive rights are essential to women's rights. Back in 2022, we carried this poster to a pro-choice march in Washington, D.C. It says, "Guerrilla Girls demand a return to traditional values on abortion." Other marchers with us did a double take when they saw that headline. But we said, read the fine print. Reading the fine print, you learn that until the middle of the 19th century, abortions were legal in the United States. Even the Catholic Church did not forbid them. And to us, reproductive rights are traditional values, and that explains the headline. And I think that even Melania has sort of said something like the same thing. But today, religious zealots on the US Supreme Court, backed up by politicians all over the country, have taken away a woman's right to make her own decision. And this, of course, has endangered the lives of girls, women, and the doctors and nurses who care for them. Women are dying as a result. So we decided to take a look at the justices who stripped away our abortion rights. Meet the creeps. And we decided to investigate and cross-examine each one of them. For example, Samuel Alito. And I leave it up to you to find the typo in this one. For example, Justice Samuel Alito claims women's rights derive from the 13th century, a time when women were kept illiterate, were burned at the stake when outspoken or if they wore men's clothes. They could be legally beaten and raped by their husband. And of course, the earth was flat. War, democracy, and feminism. For years, we have been trying to sell the world a new weapon, the estrogen bomb. And here it is on a huge banner on a former military museum in Dresden, Germany, which is now a museum dedicated to peace. It's also been seen in the US, Britain, Spain, Athens, and also at the UN. Here it is in detail. The world needs a new weapon, the estrogen bomb. Drop it on white supremacists, anti-feminists, homophobes, transphobes, ultranationalists, religious fundamentalists, oligarchs, autocrats, and warlords. What'll they do? Well, they'll throw down their big guns, they'll hug each other, they'll apologize, and then together they will start to clean up the mess. Want a better world? Make an estrogen bomb. Democracy, feminism, and food. A museum in Korea dedicated to democracy asked us to do a project. We knew that the government in power in Korea had campaigned on an anti-feminist platform, and Korean women were pissed. As a result, many young women in Korea have chosen not to date, get married, or have children. This has become a movement. It's caused the birth rate to fall, creating difficult economic prospects for an aging population. The government blamed the crisis on feminism, but we blamed it on their anti-feminist programs. If you can't have bibimbap without hot sauce, you can't have democracy, freedom, and equality for all without feminism. And I'd like to sort of end this evening on a more patriotic note, American style. It's not apple pie without ice cream. It's not democracy without feminism. Feminism is democracy, equality, and justice for all people and all genders. Thank you. Is the seat here? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So my first question is that in 1985, you set out to do something. You said with other people, we want to make something. We want to make change with making. What did you expect to make? And how was that different than what's ended up being your career over the past 4 decades?
Well, we didn't start out with a plan. We were just angry. And we figured out a cheap way to communicate to people and a new way. In 1984, the Museum of Modern Art opened up after a huge renovation with an exhibition that they touted as an international survey of painting and sculpture. Well, out of about 200 artists, there were like 17 women and even fewer artists of color. And we said to ourselves, how international could that be? We went to a protest outside the museum, and it was a standard protest with placards and chants and a picket line. And we spent all day there, and we realized all we did was make people angry. You know, no one going into the museum really thought to think about what they were being shown. They had this idea of art appreciation that's about kind of just accepting everything that you're given. When in fact, art and culture is about discourse and it's about dialogue. So myself and Kata Kolwitz, the other founding member who's still working with the group with me, we decided that there had to be a better way, that we had to sort of break through the preconceptions and get people to think about the art world and actually look at it as we look at all other fields of human endeavor. And so we came up with the first two posters. We called together a bunch of our friends who were also angry. And we took up a collection and we decided to claim the streets. It was a time when, lower Manhattan was pretty open and you could put things up wherever you wanted. So we just plastered these posters all over Soho and then into the East Village. And overnight it ignited a dialogue and people started talking about the issue. We didn't plan it, it just happened. And we just kept going after it because we knew there was something there. There was a story there that had to be told. And because the public had such a reaction to what we were doing, we just kept going for it and doing one thing after another. And here we are.
So in the past 4 decades, how would you say the art world has changed? Because it was such a direct response, what you were doing to the condition.
Well, it's a lot larger. It's a lot more international. A lot of the stupid things that gallery owners would say back in 1985, things like, well, women artists and artists of color just are not doing work that's part of the contemporary dialogue. They would never say that now. So I think that consciousness, we have to say, has changed. What has changed is, a stunning glass ceiling, for women and artists of color. They get sort of picked up and they get loved, and then, and then they sort of, don't have sustained careers. Also, the art world has changed in that I'm talking about the art world of art museums in New York. I realize there are many, many art worlds that are wonderful and great and should get more attention and more importance than they do have. But the world we were talking about is the world that a lot of art students are in some ways encouraged to buy a lottery ticket for. That art world has become about the production of luxury items for billionaire art collectors. And it becomes a commodity. People, they buy art, they stick it in a kind of safe port where they don't have to pay taxes on it. It never gets seen, and it becomes a commodity. It becomes an investment. And those are the very people who sit on the boards of major New York City museums. And it's sort of a conflict of interest if they're both serving on a nonprofit board and investing in the work that the institution is able to value.
Do you feel like the art that is being made in that context has shifted? Like people are making things in a commodified way that was not the case in the 80s or 90s?
Sure, because artists, once they have a reputation, they have to maintain it. And they maintain it by feeding the beast. And a lot of artists get sucked into that, a lot of wonderful artists. And that's kind of sad too.
It's interesting because the power of your approach is how democratizing it is. It's on the street, it's a poster. It's the kind of thing that if you're not paying attention to could be just another commercialized ad, very much in line with what you're talking about. Do you feel like in the age of online surveillance from all sorts of institutions and powers that be, that there will be a resurgence of that kind of guerrilla marketing, tactile in-person art making? Or do you think that the frontier is going to be more online, where people are making things that could shift conversations for people?
Well, let's hope. Let's hope. I mean, nothing we do is precious. Anyone with $30 can own one of our posters, and it's the same poster that is in the collection of the Boston Museum. So I think we've become a model for an alternative kind of lifestyle. But I don't know that we'll really be able to, chip into the the sort of capitalist idea that there has to be a few artist winners and everyone else is a loser, even though you live an entirely creative life and you create the creative community in which the stars emerge. There's so many cultural traditions where art isn't competitive like that. Artists are admired as makers and as makers of culture. And they're not in competition with each other, and they aren't, they don't live their lives sort of as unseen, heroes. I mean, the Western stereotype is that you labor your whole life and you get discovered after you die. Well, I mean, that's a fantasy. Unfortunately, I mean, it's a fantasy that we all get fed, but it does become a reality in the kind of capitalist art system. But there are lots of traditions and lots of art worlds where just the idea of being an artist is considered a respectable profession, a respectable life. Somehow in the American high art, museum art world, success is what is respected, and it's really only given out to a few people who sort of understand and can work within the market.
I know that the Guerrilla Girls self-describe what they make as activist art. What do you think the line is between art with politics and activist art, if there is one?
I think art, before abstraction and abstract expressionism and formalism, was always had a political content. And I think if you dig hard, you dig into the history of abstract expressionism, it was a political reaction to the Second World War, where the individualism of, of Americans who sort of, helped win the war, became a kind of metaphor for making art. Your art was about yourself. It wasn't about the world you lived in. It wasn't about the times that you went through or any event that happened in your life. It was about your internal self. And that sort of flipped it all around and created art education that really focused on the individual. And I think that's breaking up now. And it's also a reason why it's hard for artists to collaborate. And it's also why many of our members, decided to go off and do their own individual work, because they just weren't, you have to have a lot of patience to work in a collaboration. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's terrible. But if you really believe in the idea of making a collective message, then that's what you have to do. But, I wasn't trained to do that in art school. I was trained to be, a defiant individual who could compromise to nothing. So I think that's changing. Schools are teaching, collective art forms, and they're studying non-Western art. They're looking at other artistic traditions, and they're also talking about art as social activation.
Do you feel like there is an effective way to inoculate yourself against the instinct to be in competition with everyone else who's making things? I find that very difficult sometimes, to remove my instinct to prove that I can do something from the toxic nature of competition. How would you protect yourself?
Well, I think women and artists of color for a long time, have been held back. So I would say that, for us, we need to not take it personally, and we need to not ask permission, and never take no for an answer. I don't know that that's competition. It is furthering yourself as an individual in the world, but it doesn't mean to do that you have to knock someone else down, and you have to be a winner among others. I think, and I think you find it a lot in younger artists now, that it's about their message to the world, and which doesn't have to be competitive. There needs to be room for, more artists than we allow in the Whitney Biennial, for example. I think in 17th century Delft, there were as many artists as there were bakers, because everybody wanted a painting in their kitchen. Now, people wouldn't even think to have a Keith Haring or a Jean-Michel Basquiat or a Cindy Sherman in their homes. Only wealthy people can do that. But there's a lot of art out there being made that can be loved in your home.
What the Guerrilla Girls have made over the past several decades is very powerful art, very powerful messaging. I wonder, do you ever, is the heaviness of the effort, does it ever get in the way of the joy of making? Do you still enjoy making art in the same way you did when you started?
I think it's different now because we're in a very lucky position because we know that everything we make will get out. We're not working in a vacuum. So that's a great privilege that we have over others. But I have to say this mask is a real protection because you can have two personalities. And believe it or not, in my real life, I'm shy. But you wouldn't believe what comes out of your mouth when you put a gorilla mask on.
I believe that. The gorilla mask is interesting. Have there ever been moments where you've reconsidered using the mask? I know that it's a loaded image to begin with, and it's a choice to keep it on for as long as you have.
It is a loaded image that's connected, with racial stereotypes. But when we first started out, we were dealing with stereotypes all the time. We wanted to be gorillas because the stereotype of a gorilla was, a freedom fighter, and the art world was so nicey nice that if we called ourselves gorillas, people would start to worry if we were infiltrating all of their cocktail parties and their openings. And we used the word girl because, it had been used as a stereotype to kind of diminish women and infantilize them. And the gorilla mask sort of came out of that too. We thought, well, maybe we can break that stereotype too. I'm afraid that really hasn't happened. But I kind of love the idea of gorillas because they are, they're very peaceful. They're vegetarians. They take care of each other. They groom each other. They take care of each other's children. They live they live, unfortunately, in kind of harems, many females and one male. And many of the males then are outcast. So I don't know why they have a stereotype of being dangerous or scary or less than. They are wonderful, kind, animals. The fact that they're large and a little frightening and incredibly strong, they're not violent. So that's one reason why I think we've stuck to the mask. Also, it's by this point it's become our shtick. It's become our icon. So, what other mask should we have been? Gorilla worms or something? I don't know.
That's a good point. Yeah,
Gorilla turtles.
And I was noticing in the images, the mask has changed over the years. Has there been an intentional movement one way or the other? Does it change out often? Like this is a much more, I'd say, aggressive looking face than the one with lipstick that we saw earlier.
Well, it's the market. When we started out these are off the shelf masks. We don't have anyone design them for us. It's what we can get. And there used to be many, many, many different gorilla masks. I remember going into Abracadabra, which was a costume store in New York. I don't know if any of you out in the audience ever went there. It was this crazy store on 17th Street where you'd go in and say, where are the gorilla masks? And they'd point to the corner and there'd be this pile, of rubber gorilla masks, and you just go through them. But now there are very, very few. So we're kind of stuck with this mask. Although the guy who makes them gives them to us for free because he uses us to advertise them on his website. He didn't tell us that. We found out, and we went back and pressured him, to give us masks.
I like that. Yeah, it's funny. Free advertisement from the Guerrilla Girls is a weird inversion of your whole shtick. So before we turn to the audience to ask questions, do you have any advice for how to meet the moment we are currently in? Especially for people who are in a college town, in an art and culture town, how can people activate themselves and not shut down right now?
Well, I just spent 2 days in Louisville, Kentucky, giving a keynote speech at the convention of the National Association of Art Educators. And there were 3,500 people in the audience, and they were all art teachers. And they are really in the trenches. Many of them are from very conservative states, Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama. And I mean, artists have a particular protection because a lot of time, well, our work is very verbal, but a lot of art is nonverbal. So, freedom of expression is, has a larger range. It's harder to point your finger at something and say that that's unacceptable according to the government censors that are coming for us. So I would say protect your space, and find kindred spirits and figure out new subversive ways. If we have to change the word from diversity to accessibility, let's do it. Everybody knows what that means. If we can talk in code, let's do it. But we get no government funding, so unless they consider us terrorists because we wear this mask, we're going to keep talking out. And these art teachers were incredibly determined to make their classrooms safe spaces for their students, for their trans students, for their gay students, and for all of their students, that the art room and art class is a place where freedom of expression is honored and encouraged and protected.
Wonderful. Okay, I think that we might have a few questions.
Thank you. This was just brilliant. Thank you. I just have a comment. You talked about the gorillas, the harem of gorillas in the forest. I would like to suggest that we see them as a community of sisters.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
That was it. Thank you.
A much better way to describe it. Thank you. Can I take that idea? Yeah.
Hi, thank you for being here. I just wanted to ask about your choice of pseudonym
Uh-huh.
and just how you go about, selecting your artists.
Well, they have to be dead. And it was sort of serendipitous, just the way our being, taking a gorilla mask, because first we wanted to be freedom fighters, guerrillas, and we had no idea we'd be wearing a mask. It's just that funny alliteration. One of our early members was a bad speller, and she spelled guerrilla, gorilla. It was like, oh, let's wear gorilla masks. We tossed the idea around, and that was it. We decided to take the names of women artists as pseudonyms because when we started speaking to the press, we wanted to know which one of our members said what. And so we had to have some way to identify ourselves without, using our real names. And we were on our way to Philadelphia to do an interview with Terry Gross, which she never broadcast. And it was the day that Georgia O'Keeffe died. And so on the way down, because we were all just flying by the seat of our pantyhose, because we had jobs and we were doing our work, and we hadn't really thought it through. So on the way down, they were listening to the radio. They talked about Georgia O'Keeffe dying. And then they said, "Oh my God, we have to have some way of identifying ourselves." And one of the women one of the members in the car said, "Well, why don't you call me Georgia O'Keeffe?" And the other one said, "Well, then I'll be Sophonisba Anguissola." And another said, "Well, I'll be Artemisia Gentileschi." So that's how it came about. And everyone chooses a name according to their own personal choices. I particularly love the personality of Frida Kahlo and how she just, she called things as they were, and she made wonderful art out of the tragedies and sadnesses in her life. So she spoke to me in a very personal way.
Hi, thank you. The mayor of Boston, Mayor Michelle Wu, launched a program last year where all of the students that go to the Boston public school system and their families can go to all of the museums in the city and other like concert venues for free. What do you think is the role of these types of programs in democratizing the art world?
Everything. It's great. You go to many museums in Europe and they're gathering places. You go to the Tate Modern, it's free, it's open late, people hang out. But you go to the Museum of Modern Art and you have to cough up $35. You have to go through a line. You're not allowed to talk. You're not allowed to talk in front of more than 5 people talking about the paintings for fear that you're speaking for the museum. Museums in the United States are very uptight. Oh no, I'm sorry. I'm overgeneralizing. The major museums in New York are what I'm talking about because that's where I live and that's what I know. They're really uptight and they're expensive and they're not very accessible. So I think that's a great program. That's a wonderful program.
That program is incredible. Our show, The Culture Show on GBH, has talked to Mayor Wu many times about what it looks like to actually expand that to multiple, not only is it the students themselves,
Sure.
their family members, it's multiple weekends a month. And now they just opened it up, not just visual arts institutions, but performing arts and cultural
Yeah.
centers. It's an incredible opportunity. So if any of you know any school-aged public school students, get them to go to the museums. Anything else?
Hi, thanks. This is wonderful. There's a growing trend that everybody in this room knows about, which is the government is proposing to unmask all protesters.
Yes.
In your experience over this long period of time, have you been attacked during protests, and have people tried to unmask you or expose you for being something other than what you present?
Well, to be honest, we don't wear these masks very often in protests. We usually go as ourselves. This is kind of our professional, jungle drag. So we haven't really been bothered by that. There was a time in New York where, and it was from the time of the Ku Klux Klan, where, to keep the Klan rallies from happening, there was a law that prohibited anyone from, marching in public in a mask. For a long time, that was, was the law, and then it wasn't the law, when the Klan, morphed into the Republican Party. Sorry, I let that slip out. So we really aren't bothered by that, but we haven't. We are annoyed by it, but we haven't been, we haven't been in any way controlled by it. However, we were in Bulgaria we were in Sofia, Bulgaria for International Women's Day, and they have a huge march there. And we did march in the Women's Day Parade with a project that we did with the Bulgarian Fund for Women. And we were stopped and told to take off the mask. Now, we don't know very much about the law, but of course the young Bulgarian women with us, they wanted to argue with the police because, they really believed that it was just a fabricated, prohibition.
Thank you so much for being here. I wondered if there are other countries or museums that you would single out for doing a good job specifically.
Well, we aren't statisticians. We just sort of, and we're a much smaller group than you think. But whatever your fantasy is about how big we are is fine. So, and we're not statisticians. We don't sit around and keep, we kind of know the places that we've been invited to. And if you all have the time to go on to the PBS Art 21, there's a 16-minute film that they did of us 2 years ago. And in that film, Frances Morris, who was the former director of the Tate Modern, talks about how when she showed our work in the museum, they've always had a room of our work, I think probably because we attack America, American museums. She said she was profoundly affected by our work, and it made her feel complicit in a discriminatory system. So she took it upon herself in her last few years at Tate Modern to initiate diversity programs. And if you go to the Tate, and you walk through their historic rooms, you get an entirely different idea of the history of modernism, and the history of political art. And I would certainly give them a star under her directorship. There was a time in Spain where they passed a law saying that all cultural funding, and in these countries, you have to realize that the museums are run by the government. They're not run by private art, billionaire art collectors like many of our museums are run. So in Spain, they passed this law saying that there had to be proportional spending, on art that was equal between genders. Now, the problem there is that the Prado has its collection, the Reina Sofia has its collection. So only going forward does that apply. And it takes a long time then, to sort of make the museums really look like the culture that they represent. And then there's also the problem of enforcement. It's like you can have a law on the books, but who enforces the fact that it's not abided by? So I don't know whether that's just two examples that we know of, and the Pompidou had they did an exhibition when they were running out of money for exhibitions. It was about 10 years ago. One of the curators had this great idea. Well, let's do a really cheap show and let's make it about the women artists in our collection. And they entitled it Elle au Centre Pompidou. And we were in the show. It was great. We got us, to go see it. The director fought the idea for the longest time. And finally, for economic reasons, because it was such a cheap show to put together, they did it. It was an outstanding success. They expanded the show. They toured it. The attendance records went through the roof. So it just goes to show the kind of institutional what's the word, inertia in many cases. When you have a collection, you get, you don't think past the collection, and then it is what it is, and you just keep, recycling the work, under another guise. But that was a great show. And then, of course, the curator got fired. So anyway. Or maybe she moved on to something else. Maybe I'm over dramatizing it, but she didn't stay there long after the show.
I just wanted to know if I know that obviously the start was sort of like you said, you were flying by the seat of your pantyhose, I think is what you said. But now, 40 years later, right? Has there been given much thought around legacy and like how you maintain it like in the future with like I don't know what the grouping looks like, if it's like still all original people or people have come and gone, but I was wondering if you could just share a little bit about how you maintain this collective for 40 years and then what the plans are for the future.
Well, I think it's been held together by piss and vinegar. Just determination, and a few of us were able to make a sacrifice, and in many ways sacrifice our individual art practices to continue to do this because it's so much fun. It is fun. It's to be happy and angry at the same time is really a wonderful feeling, especially now. There are two of us remaining from original times, but we have people who come in and out. And people had, individual, they had personal lives that they had to follow. I'm really proud to say that many of our former members who are now in their 70s and 80s are having stunning careers in the art world that we're super, super proud of. Emma Amos being one who's no longer with us. I can talk about the ones who are deceased. Emma Amos and the wonderful Lorraine O'Grady. You couldn't spend 10 minutes with Lorraine without learning something. But back to the idea of legacy. We don't have a consensus about that. And that's a challenge we have to think about. But I think there should be more groups like ours. Why do we have to continue why? I mean, we're cooked. We have our, no, really. I mean, we have our history, we have our style. I'm bossy, in the group, shy but bossy. So I don't really, I mean, I would like to keep the work that we have done alive, but I don't know that it has to continue beyond, beyond the lifespans of our current members. I think it should, someone else has to pick up the mantle and go with it.
Hi. Okay. I know what I want to say, but I'm trying to form it into a question.
You saw I read from a script.
Yeah. So I first discovered your work in like 2016 when I was studying abroad in Paris, and it was up in a gallery, and I went with my friends. And it was really like life-changing because it involved statistics, and I always love the idea of attaching facts to experiences. Sorry, point. That inspired me to make my own work involving statistics. I went to Tufts University, and only 4% of the student body was Black, and has been for a very long time. And I made a work based on that. But to my point, I guess when I make work, I can't separate it from my identity and who I am, but it definitely is still about who I am as a part of a community and as a group. So I guess what I'm thinking about is when you showed the work of the Hudson, New York.
Hudson River School paintings.
Yes, the River School paintings. I thought about how you included that information and like the overlay on top of the artwork, and how I wish that museums would involve that system in their way of displaying the work, because as we know, with more time, more information is unveiled, and we have access to more. So like, instead of having to address it in my paintings, and like talk about how Paul Gauguin is a terrible person. It would just be great if they either took down his work or made sure to emphasize on the history of the artist, and not just that, oh, look at all these pretty colors. So I guess my question is like, have you challenged the museums to do more in terms of in that area, instead of just like your work disrupting the spaces as like artwork, if that makes sense?
Well, you can't change all the museums in a day.
No.
You have to go kind of one by one. And I don't think we're about censoring art. We're really about being realistic about it. And we have we have a project that I didn't have time to show today, although maybe I should have. My presentation was a little bit shorter than I thought. We have something called the male gaze. Now, the male gaze is this our historical idea that Western art is about, a male view, the male gaze. Well, when we started to look into the lives of artists like Gauguin, we realized that there was a lot of grazing going on there too. So we did a short video called The Male Gaze that examines, Gauguin. It examines Hans Hofmann. It examines Lucian Freud, and it examines Chuck Close and David Smith. And then we did that for a project in England called Art Night. And we did a big poster too that had all of the naked women in historic paintings in major British collections. And we asked the question, does your favorite museum have as many women artists as naked women in the paintings? And what that really did is it kind of underscores the fact that a lot of the paintings from the Baroque period through the 20th century of naked women, the women are either idle and being, observed, eavesdropped on, or they're being acted upon. Not too many really have active lives. And there's a whole room at the Getty Museum in California, and we're doing a project there next year that we call the Rape Room. Almost every painting has a naked woman who's being acted upon, either seducing, being seduced. There are Lot's daughters seducing him. Anyway, it's not to censor the work, but to realize that sexual violence and voyeurism is a part of our Western culture. And we can't change that. And those paintings are, in many ways, beautiful, but they're also a little twisted in terms of our values. And I wouldn't censor them. I wouldn't take them down. I would just say, let's use them as a way of examining our culture. I guess that's also part of my annoyance with art appreciation, because if you appreciate something, you don't question it. And these paintings do represent who we are, and let's face it. Let's face it and use it as a way to change. So what we're going to do with the paintings from the Rape Room, because we're doing a show at the Getty Research Institute. Although, to be honest, I'm not sure the museum has approved this yet. We have to. Anyway, we're going to take reproductions of the paintings from the Rape Room, and we're going to have, in the same way we did with the Hudson River School paintings, we're going to have the characters, the women figures, step out of the paintings and talk about their lives, and perhaps look at that through a 21st century lens. It's going to be a lot of fun. I just can't wait.
Well, I'll just say thank you so much. And also a Spanish educator. And it's so true that what teachers and educators of all levels are going through right now is the affinity space that I want to create. So I would just say thank you for your words of encouragement, and also for speaking about the important work that art education is, from the smallest to the oldest. And I guess I would say also, to your point, that a lot of museums are doing great work with what they write about. And I just feel like that's a change that has happened since the 80s when I was in high school, and to really deeply appreciate it. And I guess my question is, who are some artists or art groups or artivists that you're excited about, or that bring you joy or hope or inspiration?
We kind of have a group policy not to promote any individual artists. We're more about inclusion. So I think my answer is, why don't you investigate? Go out and, there are lots of artists out, and the internet is a wonderful way to find them. Most artists have websites. Although, you know what, I'm going to digress a minute, because just last week I met for the first time someone I really admire, and that is Roberto Lugo. I don't know whether you know him. He's a ceramic artist who he works in Philadelphia, and he does incredible, vases, and pottery based on historic pottery, but he reinterprets it in terms of his culture and hip hop culture. And he's starting to do projects in museums, all over the place. If you get to the Afrofuturist room at the Metropolitan Museum, there's a couple of his pieces there. I don't know, does anyone know if the Boston Museum has any Roberto Lugos? They do? Yeah, well, run to see them.
If you're, I don't know, if you're like an artist right now and you feel like you want to put out like similar work, like not the same, but similar, but like you're kind of scared of what could happen, like would it be okay if I put on a mask too and did the same thing, but in my own style?
Well, I mean, if you pretend that you're us, that's not exactly honest.
Oh, no,
yeah.
like not y'all, not
Yeah.
y'all exactly,
Yeah.
but like,
Yeah.
but like,
Sure,
Yeah.
yeah. Put on a mask,
and like, yeah, like what can you like do? Like how you like have you done like your research into what kind of projects you?
Well,
work on?
there were no rules. We had no rules when we started. We just did it. And, it's a different time, different context. Just, if you want to do it, do it. Try to figure it out. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. As I said, our motto is just try one thing. If it works, do another. If it doesn't work, do another anyway. Just keep plugging away. So just do it. Do it. Don't be afraid. Although this is a scarier times than when we started, and there are places in the world where artists go to jail, in Turkey, in Iran, in Russia. Pussy Riot had to leave. So we aren't at that point yet, but I would say push the envelope and see where the edge is. I don't think the government really cares about art right now. I mean, they care about official art. They've taken over the Kennedy Center, and they're trying to influence the National Gallery. But that's the art that's in museums. That's not the only art that artists make. Live a creative life and express yourself. Don't ask permission. Don't take no for an answer, and do it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frida. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks. Oh, here's some bananas. So, should I just throw them to you?
Yes.
Do you have enough insurance in case someone gets hit by a banana? Okay. There's one. Uh-oh. Oh, yeah, that's a little scary right there. I think you're going to have to come up for this one. All right? Come on up. 2 more bananas. I'll kiss this one. This one's special. Thank you.
This one's special. I kissed them.
There you go. Thank you. Oh. Thank you. Thanks. So long.